So first of all, I just want to thank everyone for say welcome and thank everyone for coming. Now, I think that when we practice together, and it just seems so important to me that it's the we're sitting at the end of a 2,500 year tradition that the Siddhartha Gautama first broke this trail 2,500 years ago. And when we walk along it together or separately, but particularly when we walk it together, we keep it open. So we keep it open for people in the future. And that's just a wonderful thing to do. And I often think that if there's to be any hope for any humans in the future, it has to come through our awareness practice. And so thank you for coming. I think we're doing good things here. And what I want to talk about specifically today is something I don't think I've heard anyone talk about recently anyway, it's not that I can think of, and that is the intersection or the interaction between our Dharma practice and the arts, the fine arts, poetry, literature, and I want to extend that to all kinds of art. I consider that natural sciences are a form of art. And it's we sometimes say, what is not the Dharma? Show me that. Show me what is not the Dharma. I think we could say that about art. Show me what is not art in the world. Show me what is not reflecting the beauty of the world. If you probably some things might look quite ugly and quite hideous to us, but maybe we just haven't looked at them right, and maybe that's a part of our practice. So I want to talk about that, and it's quite obvious that our ancestors certainly valued the poetry and the arts in general, and calligraphy. We know that. If you look at the koan collections that we have from our revered ancestors, everyone has an appreciatory verse associated with it. Now, paper was very valuable to them. They wouldn't have wasted it on a simple artistic affectation. It mattered to them that there was some expression of the Dharma in those words. And of course, as we're practicing koans, we often will have to, Roshi will expect us to do an appreciation of the appreciatory verse as well. And that's actually one of my favorite parts of the koans is, and also, the stories of students who come to deep insight into the nature of the world, and they would present their understanding to the teacher in the form of a verse, and then the teacher would approve them. So obviously it did. Looking at more contemporary world, it's very clear that obviously we still practice, we still show respect for that tradition. When we do our Shiso Hosan ceremony, all of the senior students give an appreciatory verse to the Shiso, and it has to be an original one. You can't just, you don't get one given to you. You have to make one up, to create one. And I always think that's quite a beautiful part of the ceremony. And I certainly remember mine. I deeply appreciated the verses that people gave me. And also when people reach the point of being teachers and approved as teachers, and we go through that ceremony, they'll have a little verse that they'll recite. They'll create a little verse for each station and the altar and the process. And I always think that's quite a beautiful thing to do. So quite obviously, we still honor it. There are some teachers in more recent times, I think, have really gone out of, really put a lot of emphasis on that. And one I think of immediately, which I think we all know, is Daido Roshi. He was a professional photographer before he started practicing Zen. And I believe, I think Shishin Roshi told me this, that he had originally set up Mount Tremper as a Zen arts facility. He wanted to bring forward Zen arts as fine arts. And that somehow or other, as things often change, it didn't quite work out that way. But I'm told that when people do Ongo, they're expected to have an art practice along with their Dharma practice. And I just think it's a wonderful idea. I often wish I would do that. Of course, we don't have a formal requirement for that, but and there's nothing to stop me to have done it just by myself. But I have never been able to gain the energy. There's something about being with a group where everyone's doing the same thing. But yeah, one of these days maybe I'll have enough energy to actually really do a proper art practice to go along. And I only ever got to meet Daido one time. Obviously, Tessito Sensei spoken of him very warmly. Obviously knew him very well. Probably about 2002, Daido came to Boulder to teach a workshop at the Roper, and after the workshop, the Roshis, Roshi Shinko and Shishin Roshi took a group of us to meet Daido, just hang out with him, and he has this fearsome reputation. I think he really reveled in that, and this tough guy, New York kid, but he just really, obviously for me, just had really, underneath that, there was just a heart of gold and kindness. And he was just really fun to be around, and particularly in that circumstance. And so Shishin Roshi introduced all of us, and then he found out, and Daido found out that I was from New Zealand, and he was quite enchanted by that idea, and he was laughing, because he had a couple of satellite sanghas in New Zealand, and he used to go down there to lead retreats. And so he immediately did his best imitation of a New Zealand accent, which I thought was just fantastic. It's funny. And then he was reflecting on it, and he said, New Zealanders are just like New Yorkers. And he talked about how one time he went down to do a retreat in Nelson, which is about a couple of 100 miles from Auckland, and it's moderately difficult to get there. But not that hard. And afterwards, he asked one of the Auckland guys, why don't you come down and do session with us in Nelson? And the Auckland guy said, it's too far. What do you mean it's too far? I've come all the way from upstate New York, and it's too far? No. And I just thought that was hilarious. It reminded me very much of when we were at GMCC, when we were in Lafayette, and people from Boulder would say, it's too far to come out to Lafayette. Maybe I should have channeled my inner Daido and said, what do you mean it's too far to come from Boulder? I've come all the way from Seattle. How do you mean it's too far? So he was a professional photographer, and he has a wonderful section in one of his book, The Heart of Being, where he's talking about this. And he's talking about how he came to Zen originally. I'll just read that out. Initially, I was practicing because I wanted to take better pictures. At that time, I was a professional photographer. My photography teacher, Minor White, told me that meditation helped him to see more clearly. I wanted to see like Minor White, and if he had stood on his head, I would have stood on my head. Fortunately, he did meditation. So, but as Shishin Roshi's often said, the reasons that we start practice are not, they're fine, whatever they are. It's just keep practicing, and the practice will take over and direct your life the way it needs to go. Of course, that's what certainly happened with Daido. And the other teacher I had, a contemporary teacher I had in mind to talk a little about in terms of art and Dharma is Soen Nakagawa. This is a book by Edo Roshi, and he has some really interesting observations about Soen. Soen isn't strictly in our lineage, but I think you could say he's kind of part of our Dharma family, because Shishin Roshi trained with Sochu Roshi in London, and also with Soen, so he knew Soen. And I remember Shishin telling me that Soen was really considered a national treasure in Japan because of the beauty of his poetry and his calligraphy also. but he was obviously a very well-established teacher, a somewhat eccentric one, and some of the stories here are really quite enlightening. And this is what Ada Roshi says. Once on a very hot day in the middle of summer, the abbot of Shojinji and his attendant visited Ryotakaji. That was just after someone had become abbot of Ryotakaji. They were shocked to see that despite the heat, a hibachi used to warm their hands in cold weather was set out. So and Roshi gestured towards the hibachi, and when they looked inside, swimming in a bowl of water was a beautiful goldfish. It was So and Roshi's completely original way of providing his guests with a refreshing moment of coolness on a hot summer day. Having lived in America for more than 3 decades, I know that from a Western point of view, So and Roshi's way of greeting his visitors would have been taken as an expression of his free, poetic Zen spirit. However, from their conservative, conventional Japanese point of view, it was interpreted as strange and disrespectful. In this meeting, Soen was a new Roshi. The other was a far senior, the abbot of a monastery founded 600 years earlier. Ryotakaji, although established by Hakuin about 200 years ago, had been a trading monastery for only 50 years. And he goes on to another similar episode. In 1965, the ceremony commemorating the 1100th year of Rinzai's death, almost all the Roshis of the Rinzai school gathered. And Soen was given the task of, in this formal occasion, of presiding over the tea ceremony. He startled the assembled dignitaries by whisking the powdered tea himself, rather than having his attendant to do it, as is custom. Now, we in the West might interpret this as an example of Soen Roshi's personal warmth and humility. But in Japan, the tea ceremony, especially in a formal event such as this, must be carried out in the traditional manner so that harmony is observed and everyone feels comfortable. By taking over the role of the assistant, he acted in a way that was incomprehensible to the other Roshis. Through incidents like this one, he became notorious for his unconventional behavior. In America, we delighted in calling him untamed. In Japan, they called him untrained, and some turned away from him. Soen Roshi created a world far different from the other Zen masters. It was a world where beauty, aesthetic concerns, and the gestures touching the ancient heart were more important than propriety. He believed that beauty is not what is obvious, but is what is mysterious and hidden. Once he asked me, "Tai-san, how would you define beauty? We think we know what beauty is, but when the question is asked, it's not so easy to answer." I said, "You are my teacher, so please define it for me." He said, "If an event is unrepeatable, that is beauty." That was his definition. Beauty is unrepeatable. It is something that is so subtle that it cannot be spoken of. Well, isn't that just a beautiful representation, not only of art and poetry and fine arts and science in general, but of all our Dharma practice? It's so unspeakably, we can't speak of it. We try and we fail, and we try again and we fail again, but we go on. And so that's the, I have a lot of sympathy for Soen's view. I think many Western people would, but I think we have to appreciate that, as Ada Roshi points out, that's not necessarily how everyone would see it. And we must at least have respect for their rather, what to us seems a strange view, but to them it's it's not, it's about making a place that's comfortable for people. So I think, we have to remember that. And that's a worthwhile teaching in its own right. So one of the things that I really wanted to do in this, and talking about art and Dharma, is to try and emulate Soen's goldfish and present all of you with something that's just spontaneous and unexpected. And of course, I can't give you a gold plate, I don't have one. In any case, it would hardly work because someone already did it. So you can't do that. But I thought that what I would like to do is to do a poetry reading of a poem that certainly means a lot to me. I wish I'd written it, but it's written by Gary Snyder. And I'll apologize up front if some people here don't like Gary Snyder. I don't expect people to necessarily do. I mean, there's lots of writers that I don't care for, and I respect the people who do, but nonetheless, I'd like to. Tetsudo Sensei last week was talking about his discovery of Zen and his time at Naropa and all the crazy Buddhist poets and one of them is, of course, Jack Kerouac. And if you go to Naropa, there's the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. And he talked about that. And one of Kerouac's most famous books is Dharma Bums. And it's a kind of a young person's sort of exploration of the Dharma. Those of us a bit older couldn't do that anymore. But the most famous character in that is J.P. Ryder. It was a very, very thinly disguised Gary Snyder. And it ends with Snyder going off to Japan to study Zen. And of course, it's really not Gary Snyder. It's Jack Kerouac's rather fevered imagination of who Gary Snyder is. And of course, Snyder spent his whole life going around saying, no, I'm not that. I'm not J.P. Ryder. That's just a fictional character. But nonetheless, it's a compelling book, and I've always found Snyder a very compelling writer because he touches on things that not only art but science, and he takes science with great respect, and his Zen practice, which he spent many years in studying Zen in Japan. And he kind of, and this poem that I'm going to read is called Journeys. And one thing I want to point out is that I didn't think about this when I first thought about this presentation, but let's talk, but this is actually Poetry Month, so maybe it's appropriate to give a reading of poetry. And this is a beautiful poem. To me, it has a lot of Dharma implications because it's continually moving through different scenes of dreams, waking dreams and sleeping dreams, and it's really hard to tell where the one leads off and one takes up, and it's just so fluid. And isn't that what our life is? We don't really know what's going to happen. We can make a guess, and those of us who work in the natural sciences are paid to make guesses. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. So this is Journeys. One thing I don't want to sort of interpret the poem. I think I want everyone to hear it for themselves, and what you get out of it is what you get out of it. And I said maybe you don't like it, but the one little clue I will give is that there's a character who appears in the last verse, Kosan, and Kosan is the familiar name of Snyder's teacher in Japan. So just keep that in mind when you hear the poem, and it kind of circles backwards and forwards through all sorts of mythic images. I just want people to enjoy it. Genji caught a grey bird fluttering. It was wounded, so I hit it with a coal shovel. It stiffened, got straight and symmetrical, and began to grow in size. I took the bird by the head with both hands and held it as it swelled, turning the head from side to side. The bird became a woman, and I was embracing her. We walked down dim, lighted stairway, holding hands, then walking more and more swiftly through an enormous maze, all underground. Occasionally we touched surface, then redescended. As we walked, I held a map of our route in mind, but it became increasingly complex. And just when I was about to lose the picture, the woman transferred a piece of fresh tasting apple from her mouth to mine. Then I woke. Through deep forests to the coast, and stood on a white sand spit looking in, over lowland swamps and prairies where no one had ever been, to a view of the Olympic Mountains in the chill, clear wind. We moved across dark, stony ground to a great wall, hundreds of feet high. What was beyond it? Cows? Then something began to lift up from behind it, I shot arrows at it, but it came until we turned and ran. It's too big to fight, the rising thing a quarter mile across. It was the flaming, pulsing sun. We fled and stumbled on the bright lit plain. Where were we? A girl in a red skirt, high heels, going up the stairs before me in a made-over barn. Whitewash peeling. We lived together in the loft on cool, bare boards. Let me tell you something, kid. Back in 1910. Walking a dusty road through ploughed up fields at forest fire time, the fir tree hills dry, smoke of the fires blurred the air and passed on into the woods along the pond, beneath the big red cedar, to a bank of blinding blue wildflowers and thick green grass on leveled ground, the hillside where our old house used to stand. I saw the footings damp and tangled and thought my father was in jail and wondered why my mother never died and thought I ought to bring my sister back. High up on the yellow gold dry range mountains, brushy, rocky, cactusy hills, slowly hiking down, finally can see below a sea of clouds. Lower down, always moving slowly over the dry ground, descending, can see through the breaks in the clouds, flat land, damp green level rice fields, farmhouses, at last feel the heat and damp, descending to this humid, clouded level world. Now I have come to the lowlands. Underground building chambers clogged with refuse, discarded furniture, slag, old nails, rotting plaster, faint wisps, antique newspapers rattle in the winds that come forever down the hall, passing, climbing, and on from door to door, one tiny light bulb still burning. Now the last, locked inside is hell. Movies going, men milling about the posters in shreds. The movie always running. We all head in here somewhere. Years just looking for the bathrooms, huge and filthy, and strange shaped toilets full of shit, dried shit all around, smeared on the walls of the adjoining room. And a fast hat rack. With Lou rode in a bus over the mountains, rutted roads along the coast of Washington, through groves of redwood, sitting in the back of an almost empty bus, talking and riding through, yellow leaves fluttering down, passing through tiny towns at times, damp cabins set in dark groves of trees, beaches with estuaries and sandbars. I brought a woman here once long ago, but passed on through too quick. We were following a long river into the mountains. Finally, we rounded a ridge and could see deeper in. The farther peaks, stony and barren, a few alpine trees. Kosan and I stood on a point by a cliff over a rock-walled canyon. Ko said, "Now we have come to where we die." I asked him, "What's up there then?" Meaning the further mountains. "That's the world after death." I thought it looked just like the land we'd been traveling and couldn't see why we should have to die. Ko grabbed me and pulled me over the cliff, both of us falling. I hit and I was dead. I saw my body for a while, then it was gone. Ko was there too. We were at the bottom of the gorge. We started drifting up the canyon. This is the way to the back country. So that's my little gift, a little bit, my attempt at someone's goldfish. I hope people enjoyed it. As I said, if it's not a poem that speaks to you, I don't mind. And I guess it's time to finish my little exposition on the interaction of the Dharma and the arts. I truly believe that it's something that's important. The world is a beautiful place, and it unfolds all the time, always changing, never constant, never stable. And the arts teach us that, and the Dharma teaches us that. So